Well, we're starting a brand new series, and we are people that live and interact in relationships, right? It's a huge part of how we do life. We're born into a relationship. It's called a family. And the reality is we're made for connections. It's funny even watching that high five video because the reality is connections matter, and how we connect with people matter. The relationships we're in and how we navigate those relationships, they don't only matter, but they really shape us. They mold who we are and who we're to become, and that's partially why we're doing this series. If you look at the teachings of Jesus, Jesus was in a lot of ways all about simplification. He liked to simplify things, and he kind of deduced all of the commands down to two major points, all right? So here you go. For those of you who don't know, what does it mean to follow God? Here it is, two commands. Love God and love your neighbor. Okay, so love God and love your neighbor. So in a lot of ways at church, we've been talking about over the last 12, 13 weeks about our vertical connection with God. How do we love God? How do we interact with God? What's God's story like? How does God's story interact with us? And now we're shifting gears over the next 5 weeks, and we're going to be looking at essentially how do we love our neighbor? How do we do better and be better at relationships? Because relationships matter. It's a core part of the Bible. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at dating. Is one of the topics we'll be talking about. And dating matters because it's the single biggest relational decision that you get to make about yourself. You get to pick someone else. You didn't pick your family. You had no choice, but you get to pick who your future family will be. So dating matters because a lot of times people, unfortunately, will date below themselves or date someone they shouldn't be dating, or they're not dating towards marriage and they don't understand the reasons or the purpose behind dating. And so we'll be looking at that. We're going to be talking about friendship one week. And why friendship's important, because if you have idiot friends, chances are you're going to do some idiot stuff, right? Because sometimes when you play in the mud, you're going to get dirty. So we're going to look at friendship. It's why having a great marriage matters, because once you pick someone and you're saying, hey, I'm in with this relationship for the rest of my life, and you have a partnership with another human, if that relationship goes toxic, then life turns sour. So actually next week we'll be looking at marriage specifically, and we have some guest speakers coming in, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. It's why many of us are convinced that we need to be investing into a counseling fund for our kids, because we know that parenting matters and how we parent shapes the future of our children. You know, I have two boys, Jack and Luke. It's a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old. My 3-year-old just had his birthday this week, and so today, this afternoon, we're doing a Spider-Man birthday party. He's really excited about that. So it's funny though, every time I leave the house, if I have a hat on, he stops whatever he's doing before we leave, and he has to go get a hat. He always wants to copy me. If I have a hat, he wants a hat, and it's cute, right? And it's fun, but it scares the heck out of me because I realize the things that I do in life, he's gonna wanna copy, both good, bad, and it's gonna go beyond one day just me wearing a hat. And so today we have a topic that we're gonna be talking about. We're gonna be looking at a different type of relationship with a different type of group of people, and these people happen to be everywhere. You work with them. You see them at school, they're in your neighborhood, sometimes they're in your home. If you happen to work in the service industry, unfortunately, you have to deal with these people all of the time. So if you're a waiter or waitress or you work in retail, you see all different types of these people. And I'm just gonna call them difficult people. Difficult people. We all have to interact and work with and navigate difficult people. Years and years ago, I actually was a manager of Ben & Jerry's ice cream shop. Woohoo, yay me, pat myself on the back for that one. So I was manager of Ben & Jerry's ice cream shop, and people would come to the ice cream shop, they'd order ice cream, and it was amazing to me how often people were angry about the size of their ice cream scoop. I'm like, guys, you've bought the pint before, right? It's a shot glass of ice cream, and it's like $47. All right, this is Ben & Jerry's, okay? This isn't like Culver's where they just pour custard out everywhere and you get so much. But I'm thinking you should just be happy because you're getting ice cream. But people were never happy. They were always mad. And I got to see lots of different types of difficult people. And difficult people come in many different shapes and sizes. So maybe you've interacted with them. So let's just walk through really quick some of the difficult people that maybe we have to interact with on a daily basis. The first type of difficult person is the steamroller. All right? This is the person who will run you over any chance they get. They will bully you, they will manipulate you, they will try to take advantage of you. Another type of person is the Debbie Downer. If you've never seen the SNL skit Debbie Downer, you have to Google that because they're hilarious. But the Debbie Downer is the person who just kills all the fun. You go out to dinner and all they can talk about was how expensive the dinner is, or they want to bring up something really weird like, oh, look at my weird mole. I'm like, no one wants to talk about your weird mole, all right? The next type of person is maybe the volcano. This is the person that at any moment in time, they're just gonna go snap, and then things happen. They have the hottest temper you've ever seen. You cross them, they erupt, it's on. And it's scary, all right? And with the volcano, you have to walk on eggshells because you never know when they're gonna go off. Maybe you've been around the crybaby before. This is someone who's a chronic complainer. They complain constantly about everything, and they always want to get their way. And if they don't get their way, they are a victim of society. Maybe you've had to interact with the nitpicker. This is the unpleasable perfectionist. Okay? Nothing is good enough for them. Nothing will be good enough for them. No matter what, they're never happy. It's like the church music's too loud. My water was too cold. My water was too hot. My coffee didn't taste right. Whatever it is, they're never happy. Then there's the talker. All right, we've all, probably during the Connect 4, we've experienced the talker. It's like if you get cornered, you know, there goes my 4 minutes. It's over. They're just gonna go, right? 40, or if there wasn't a countdown, it'd be like, there goes 45 minutes, because they're just, and what's really even worse is when the talker's a close talker, and they get up in your biz and they have bad breath, and you're like, okay, come on, you're like backing up, trying to get away from them. So we've all been there. Next person, the space cadet. This is a person that's on a different wavelength than everyone else, right? Maybe they're a conspiracy theorist, maybe they're just a little weird, but they're always talking about something a little bit different. Then there's the energy vampire. This is the person that will suck the life out of your soul, okay? When I was in youth ministry years ago, there was, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I'll admit it nonetheless. There were some kids that I would call EGRs, extra grace required, all right? Because they just were a little special, and they were a little weird, and they'd talk about weird stuff, and they just sucked the life out of you if you weren't careful. So that's the energy vampire. Here's the thing, they're not bad people. They're just needy, right? Next, that guy. That guy is the Jersey Shore person, all right? It's dude or party girl. They're obnoxious, they're arrogant, they brag about themselves all of the time, and they're really not very fun to be around. And the last one is the know-it-all. Me. This is the person that will fact-check you and correct you every chance they get. And you know what's really awkward when you're interacting with a know-it-all is when you really realize they're wrong and you see them trying to like back out of the fact that they're wrong because they can't admit that they're wrong. And so it just makes the situation really awkward. And this is just a list of maybe some of the fun, difficult people that you have to interact with. And chances are as you're sitting there, when I say difficult person, a name pops into your head. Now do not elbow the person next to you. Okay? That's not going to get you brownie points in any way, shape, or form. But chances are we know that we have to deal with difficult people. And the reality is we don't have a choice as to if we deal with them, because it's just part of life. But we do have a choice as to how we deal with them. And as much as we'd love to sometimes tomahawk some of them in the throat or post bad things about them on Facebook or run away from them screaming, we know that we can't do that, or we shouldn't do that, right, guys? We know we shouldn't do that. Because reacting poorly to a difficult person is not going to help you become the person that you're supposed to be. Reacting poorly to a difficult person is not going to help that person become the person that they're supposed to be. And reacting poorly will shape you and mold you because our interactions with people matter. They shape us and they influence us, and they shape and influence the other person. And so we have a responsibility. If Jesus tells us to love God with all of our heart, and then he tells us to love our neighbors, we have a responsibility not just to love God, but to love the people around us and to learn how to love them and love them well. I love this verse in Hebrews chapter 10. It says this, it's real simple. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. Let us consider how we may spur our job, our responsibility, especially if you follow Jesus, is to move people towards love and good deeds, to have harmony in your relationships, to not giving up the meeting, the fellowship of being together, because relationships matter. It's a core part of how we do life, and Jesus wants to do it and for us to do it and do it well, to do our relationships really well, and to honor him. So here's what we're going to do today, a little bit different message. We're going to look at 4 things, and I'm going to walk through them pretty quick. 4 things that are going to help you deal with difficult people, 4 things for you to consider, 4 things to spur us on as a church, as a family, as to how we can handle these relationships and become better at it. And as if we as Stateliners become better at it, I think it really will impact the world around us. Number 1, first thing, how to deal with difficult people is to have a Christ-like perspective of others. And just let me throw this in there really quick. If you have the app, there's some fill in the blanks, and so the screenshots will tell you what to fill in the blanks, so under the sermon notes. So if you're tracking along, please do so. Just know that they'll be coming up on the side screens. So have a Christ-like perspective of others. Now here's what you have to understand about Jesus. And if you study the Gospels, you realize that he had to interact with difficult people constantly. It had to be exhausting because he did a 3-year nonstop public ministry, and he traveled with 12 disciples. And the 12 disciples, and I've said this before, they were a little bit like knuckleheads, okay? They were not quick studies. They made a lot of foolish mistakes. They were really arrogant sometimes. They were really asking for a lot other times. They were just kind of bozos, and to the point that one of the 12 disciples, Judas, sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. Okay, so he had to navigate difficult people and difficult relationships a ton. I mean, he would have people call him names. He would have people challenge him, yell at him. He had people mock him, reject him. And then, of course, he had religious leaders who were conspiring against him, and eventually they killed him. So what did Jesus do? How did he handle these relationships? How did he handle these people? Well, if you look at the Bible or the context of the 4 Gospels, you realize he did a lot of different things. So some of these interactions and some of these people, he actually ignored them. What? Jesus ignored people? Yeah. In certain instances, he did. In other times, he was flexible with some of the people. In other instances, he would get a righteous anger towards some of these people. Many times, he was just calm. Every interaction, though, he would bring truth and love and grace. And many times he wouldn't give in to anyone's demands or pressures of himself because he knew what he came to do and he was secure in who he was. So here's the point I want to make, and this is really important. Jesus handled each difficult scenario uniquely because he understood that each person he was dealing with was unique. Jesus handled each difficult scenario uniquely because he understood that each person he was dealing with was unique. You see, Jesus knew the people he was interacting with. He had the highest level of EQ, and if you don't know what that is, Google it. He had the highest level of EQ that you could have. And he took time to get to know the people he was interacting with and to how to evaluate that situation and that person. If you're familiar with John Rockefeller, of any of his business dealings and writings, he talked a lot about interacting with people. And when he was asked, what's the most important skill in the world, he said, well, that's really simple. It's the ability to get along with others, the ability to get along with people. And he said the skill was so special that he would be willing to pay more for that skill than any other skill. Because the truth is, if you have the right perspective of people, if you understand how to deal with people, if you understand where people are coming from, you're going to have such an easier time dealing with them, even if they're difficult. And Jesus was a master of this, and it gave him great perspective. Let's look at this verse in Matthew 9. Kind of tells us a little bit about Jesus' perspective as he was doing his ministry. It says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, when he saw the people, all these people he was interacting with, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. You see, Jesus understood that a lot of what made people the way that they are was that they were lost, that they were broken, that they were sinners. He saw people as sheep without a shepherd. Thus, the reason they were acting the way that they were acting was because they didn't know him. They were lost, they were blind, they were forgotten, they felt abused, they were broken, they had a bad story, they had a bad past, they had a history, and they were leaderless. And so Jesus saw this and he said, you know what, I'm gonna have compassion on these people because they're only acting the way they are acting because they are sheep without a shepherd. The reality is, you can't be mad for a sinner sinning. It's what they do. If they don't know Jesus, then you can't expect them to act like a Christian or have the same moral value or the same moral authority that you do because they don't know any different. They're a sheep without a shepherd. So you should have compassion on them. You know, my wife and I had this one person that we would have to interact with. And we don't have a choice. This is somebody we have to interact with on a regular basis. And I remember early on in our marriage, this person was pretty offensive to my wife. They talked really crude. They were really crass. They just drank a ton, like way more than any human should drink, okay? Like they were in an aquarium. They just would go for it every time we were together. And in general terms, they weren't really just a good person. okay? They just weren't a very nice person. And remember one day we were driving home, I was with my wife, and she was just saying, man, this person is really obnoxious, and it's just really uncomfortable to be around them. And I said, yeah, it really is, and it's tough. But I said, babe, you have to understand, if you understand his story, then you realize he's actually not that bad of a person. And she said, well, what do you mean? And so I began to unpack his story because I knew his past, that he grew up with an alcoholic father who just beat him so bad when he grew up as a child. He had a pretty rough education process, and he had a rough high school experience, and just some other nuances of the story. And I could see my wife's literally, like, her countenance shifted from almost like repulsion to compassion. Because when you know someone's story, when you know someone's past, when you understand why people are acting the way that they do, you can't help yourself but to have compassion instead of repulsion. You have understanding instead of wanting to distance yourself from them. Because Jesus was a pro at understanding that there's a reason that people are the way that they are. There's a story, and here's what you have to understand. The story, your story, and my story, it matters to God. Your past and your history, my past and my history, it matters to Jesus. It matters, no matter how perfect and sunshiny our past seems, or how real and how dark it really is. It matters. And so if we're gonna follow Jesus and we wanna do a good job of navigating people and how loving our neighbor really matters, then we have to have Christ-like perspective. We have to see him the way that he sees people, as sheep without a shepherd, that there are lost, broken, hurting people out there, and we need to be moved towards compassion towards them, not repulsion. Love, not hate, because that's the mandate of Christ. But, this is important, your compassion for people and your Christ-like perspective of people doesn't mean that you should have an unhealthy connection with them or you shouldn't have boundaries, which brings me to point number 2, how to deal with, how to navigate difficult people. You need to have boundaries. Now, if you've been around the church world at all, for any period of time, this is pretty cliche. You've heard this before. Yeah, okay, Greg, really cool point, have boundaries. I know it's cliche, but the reality is many of you, including myself at times, really stink at it. Because it's not that easy sometimes, is it? Let me read this verse that I think will help kind of frame this point for us a little bit. It's in Galatians 6, starting with verse 1. It says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. Now, there's a lot here in this passage, and this verse is pretty interesting because what this verse is actually doing is doing a few things. It's raising the value as followers of Jesus, and if that's what you want to do, this verse is telling you you should help others. You should have compassion towards others. You should try to help people when they're lost in their sin or they're struggling with something. But it also says that you need to be careful to not fall into the same sin or temptation that they're doing. And then it kind of ends with this reminder. It basically says, at the end of the day, no matter what, each person is essentially responsible for their own conduct and should carry their own load. This verse is teaching us how to have boundaries and how to have healthy boundaries in our relationship. And here's the key. The key to having healthy boundaries is to understand what is me versus what is not me. So what's me? Me is my thoughts, my values, my limits, my behaviors, my actions. Whose responsibility is me? Oh, it's not a trick question, guys. It's me. It's my responsibility is me. All right, not me is everyone else's needs, values, thoughts, limitations, and actions. Whose responsibility is not me? Not me. Jesus, somebody else's, you're right, but it's not my responsibility. And here's why this is important. You cannot have a healthy relationship and a loving interaction with someone else if you don't understand what's me versus what's not me. If your boundaries and the lines are always blurred, if there's not a clear line between what's your responsibility in a relationship and what's someone else's responsibility in a relationship, it's always not only going to be a difficult relationship, but the lines are going to be blurred as to who's supposed to do what, and what's not you will begin to control your life. What's not your responsibility will take over your thinking, your patterns, your behavior. And instead of actually helping the problem, chances are you're going to add to it or create more problems for yourself. I heard a story of some parents who saw a counselor. I heard this story a couple years ago, who saw a counselor for help with their 25-year-old son who happened to live in the house. The son had dropped out of school, he didn't have a job, he played video games all day, and he was abusing just drugs and alcohol. And the parents were confused, and they just didn't get it. They're like, hey, we raised him right. He's our son. We've given him opportunities. We've tried to put him to school. We've worked hard to take care of him. We're taking care of him now. We give him money. We are looking for jobs for him. We've bailed him out of trouble. We just don't get why he's acting the way he does. And the parents were frustrated because this young man didn't think that he had a problem. And so the counselor, in a way that sometimes only counselors can do, looked at the parents and said, well, I don't think he has a problem either. Of course, they were stunned. They were like, well, what do you mean? He said, well, he doesn't have a problem. You do. Because all of what should be his problem has become your problem. Everything that he's supposed to do, you're doing for him. So why would he think that he has a problem when all his problems are solved by you? And so the counselor said, would you like me to help you to help him have problems? Reality is your job is not to fix every problem on this earth. Your job is to be compassionate. Your job is to be loving. Your job is to follow and honor Christ to the best of your ability, to love God with all of your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Yes, you're supposed to do that and be a good neighbor, but your job isn't to fix every problem. And so understanding your boundaries will help you engage into this world in a loving way, the way that you were called and created to, and not in a way that will drain you or make you unhealthy yourselves. So you have to understand, not every need you see is your call. Even with people you love, your call is to do the thing that God asked you to do and let them do what's their responsibility. And at the end of the day, let God be God. Because you know what? A little fun fact, and I know this is surprising for some of you, but you can't save anyone. Only God can. So let God be God in people's lives. And just like that verse said, yes, we're to help each other, but we have to be careful to not allow ourselves to fall into the same temptation or any other temptation because we're a limited resource. And if we don't have healthy boundaries, if we're not looking after ourselves, there's only so much of us that we can give away. And if we're not careful, if we're weary, if we're tired, if we find ourselves breaking down or empty, you yourself will be susceptible to temptations, to sin, to breakdown. My youth pastor used to say when I was in high school, when weariness walks in, faith walks out. That's really true. There's a lot of truth there. Which kind of brings me to my third point. Number 3 thing on how to deal with or navigate difficult people. Check your fuel gauge. Check your fuel gauge. Because here's the truth. Not every person who gets a good investment from you is going to bring about a good return. Not every person you love is going to love you back. Not every person you help is going to help you back. Not every person you give to is going to give things back to you. So think about an ATM machine here for a second. It's a simple analogy, but I think you guys will get it. If you go to the ATM machine, you put in your card, put in your digits, right? And there's no money. The machine mocks you and says, you're broke, sucker. I don't know why you're trying to pull money out of me, right? If there's no money in the ATM machine, you're not mad at the ATM machine. Because all the ATM machine is a reflection of how you've handled your money. You've been taking money out, but you haven't put any money in. So the ATM machine is just a mirror. It's just a reflection of how you have handled your money. Well, in the same way, it's true of us and our human equity, our soul equity, the resource that we have with other people. If you feel drained and empty all of the time, if you're constantly weary or struggling on this line of temptation or sin, chances are you've been making withdrawals from your soul and you haven't put any deposits back in. You've been emptying yourself and you haven't been putting anything back in. And what happens when you empty yourself and you don't put anything back in? You have a spiritual overdraft. You're now running on empty. You're running on fumes. You're not running the way that God would have you to run. So if you give too much of yourself away without allowing God or other people or the right types of relationships to recharge you, you're going to be in trouble. And the reality is Jesus himself did this. There are multiple instances where Jesus, in the New Testament, we see that he withdraws from people. He pulls back from people to be alone with his Father or to pray. Why? Why would he do that? Because the God of the universe in his human body had to recharge his batteries. To do the ministry that he needed to do the work that he needed to do, to interact with people the way that he felt like he needed to interact, he had to be very intentional to check his fuel gauge, to make sure that he was doing the things he needed to do to bring the ministry he needed to bring. So you have to have things that irrigate your life to offset the people that irritate your life. Because this can be a lot of things now, right? There's a lot of things that can irrigate your life. And for all of us, because we're all unique, we've already talked about that, we're all unique, we all have something different. So I don't know what it is for you, and I can't tell you what that is for you, but if people at work irritate you or annoy you, or people at school drive you nuts, right? Or if you're getting bullied, or if somebody's annoying you, you have to have then maybe your people, your family, your friends, people that fill you back up, who pour into you, so that as other people are draining you, you have other relationships that are filling you back up. If you feel weary all the time or beat up, you need to pull back a little bit from the engagement of life and step into an engagement of prayer. And spend some time with Jesus and let Jesus fill your soul. If your mind is full of stress, maybe you need a hobby. A Sabbath day. The Sabbath is a biblical principle. If you work 7 days a week, 24/7, if you're always on the go, even if you're not working a job, but you come home and you work with your kids and you're working with your spouse and you're just always doing something, you got to clean up the house and you got to do yard work and you're just go, and you don't have a Sabbath, you don't have something that's pouring back into you that makes your soul feel alive, I'm telling you, you're running the risk of spiritual breakdown because you're a limited resource. Think about this. If Jesus had to stop, then what about you? You have to have things that irrigate your life. Because when your fuel tank is healthy, when your fuel tank is full, when you feel like you're doing this, when you feel like you're energized, you're going to be able to do and interact with the world the way that God will want you to do. You won't leak out love. You won't feel empty. You'll actually overflow love. So I want to do this little illustration here because I think it'll help make my point. I've got 2 glasses here and a pitcher full of water. This pitcher full of water, just think of it as like representing God's love. It could be a lot of things, though. Anything that fills you up, if it's God's presence, something that energizes you. Now, if you are constantly broken, if you're constantly weary, if you're not taking care of yourself, and you're pouring love into your life, you're going to get love out on other people. And you're going to be able to help other people, and you're going to be able to make an impact. But what happens over time is you'll find that, wait a minute, I'm still running on empty. Because I haven't done the work to take care of myself, to patch up the areas of my life that are broken. I haven't checked my fuel gauge very well. I'm just basically letting love get out all over the place, but myself, I'm still feeling empty. But if you find yourself whole, in constant communion with God, in relationship with God, you're checking your fuel gauge, you have healthy boundaries, you have a Christ-like perspective, and God begins to fill you up, you realize, hey, I can leak out love on other people. I can make a difference in the world around me. I can deal with difficult people, no problem. But you notice after you've leaked out love on other people, what happens? You're still full yourself. So now all of a sudden, you're not a commodity that's broken down. You're a commodity that's still full, ready to go, energized, because you've done the spiritual work of taking care of yourself, of understanding who you are and who you were called to be. And it's really important to have that perspective. She's quick, by the way. She just ran right by me. I love the ears, by the way, sweetie. They're cute. Anyways. Let me read this verse, Romans 15, verse 13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may, here's our word, and this is key, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. You see, God doesn't want you to leak, okay? God doesn't want you to leak out his love or leak out impact in the world around you. He wants you to overflow his love, because he would never sacrifice you for someone else, okay? So make sure you're doing the work of taking care of yourself. And then we have one more point, and some of you are going to like this point. Some of you may not like this point. I'm sorry. Got to do it. How to deal with difficult people. Number 4, understand that the problem may be in the mirror. I'm talking to the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his way. That was free, by the way. I just threw that in there. And some of you are probably thinking, Greg, I was tracking with you. This is pretty good until you got to the mirror part. Because you don't know these people I deal with. It's not my fault. These people are awful. They're bad people. Well, let me read a verse for you. And this ain't me. This is Jesus. You don't like this verse, just talk to Jesus about it, okay? Ready? Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all of the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Man, Jesus has a way of going there sometimes, doesn't he? So what's the log in your eye? What's the thing that you may have done, the choice that you may have made that's making things difficult for you? Or maybe making things difficult with that other person? Is the log in your eye maybe your pride, your attitude, your poor choices, maybe your poor behavior? Are you entitled? Because the truth is, a lot of times conflict with other people and dealing with difficult people, we realize it's our own fault, isn't it? Because you can't kick a hornet's nest and then be mad when you get stung. It doesn't work that way. I remember when I was a kid, I was kind of an obnoxious kid. I know it seems so hard to believe now. And I grew up in Rockton, and I was, this is embarrassing, but whatever. I'm on Rockton Road, okay, and I'm on my bike, but I'm not riding my bike. I'm sitting on the handlebars of my bike, and one of my friends is like pedaling the bike for me, and we're like doing what kids did, okay? I'm young. I'm like in junior high. And I'm flipping people off as they drive by, okay? True story. Like I said, I was harmless, okay? I'm 12. All right, so some people are like, why is he telling this story? This is not very good for him. I'm saved now. Jesus loves me, okay? So don't judge me. I was 12. All right. So I'm giving people the bird, and a car, like, rips off to the side of the road, pulls over, and, like, it felt like a clown car. Just dudes started unloading out of this car, okay? And all of a sudden, there's, like, a group of high school boys there, and they're like, hey, why did you give us the bird? All this stuff. I just go scared. I don't know what to do. I just went, like, stiff. And so the one guy grabs me and lifts me up off the handlebars and throws me into a ditch. Now, I was really sad because I had white jorts on. Back then, white jorts were a hot item. And I got grass stains now on my white jorts. So I'm like, dude, you just ruined my white jorts. But whatever, it's cool. I just laid there and played like dead, all right? So that was my move. My friend who had my bike just took off. He left me, all right, in the ditch. And then they just, they really weren't going to do anything to us, and so they got back in the car and drove away. But I remember thinking, that was 100% my fault. That happened not because they were bad guys or they were difficult people. I was the difficult person. I kicked the hornet's nest. I got stung. I had to take responsibility for that interaction. And the reality is that's a funny way of looking at it, but there's probably a lot of instances in our life where we've interacted with people, difficult people, and if we're really honest, we realize, I may have started that. I may have brought that on myself. I may have done something to instigate that. So here's the thing. The Bible tells us that we are called to be peacemakers. The Bible tells us that we're called to bring reconciliation to the people and the relationships around us. Let's look at this verse, Romans 12. It says, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you are honorable. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. See, this verse is saying you can only do what you can do to bring peace. So you have a responsibility. It's actually re-emphasizing boundaries, but it clearly states that you have a role to play. And so the question for us is, are you doing all that you can to bring peace and reconciliation to the relationships you have? Or do you find yourself bringing more strife and dissension and anger to the relationships you have? Because our goal should always be to be more helpful than hurtful. So if you're at the center of a lot of drama, look in the mirror and say, is this my fault? Is this something that I could avoid? Could the problem be that maybe we get offended too easily? That we're always looking for a fight? People don't agree with you. People don't have the same religious beliefs you do. People definitely don't have the same political beliefs you do, right? We all have different beliefs, and that's okay. So why do we get so offended all of the time? And if you get offended all the time, the Bible actually has a word for you. Fool. I just offended you, didn't I? Proverbs 12:16. A fool shows his annoyance at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult. Proverbs 19:11. Sensible people control their temper. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. So maybe a question you could start to ask yourself when you're finding yourself in a difficult situation, a question that you could ask yourself that may save you a ton of grief is this. It's really simple. Is this really worth being angry over? Is this really worth the amount of emotional capital now that I'm going to have to put in? Is this situation really worth it? Seriously, ask this question. Is the perceived offense or the offense really an offense at all, or are you just being overly sensitive? Did they really mean to hurt you the way that they hurt you? It's possible maybe you just had a bad attitude, or you were entitled, or you're being critical. If those weren't in the equation, would you still be mad? Now, I know this seems kind of harsh, and I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm actually trying to be helpful. Because I really think that if we could ask this question and really look at the world through this lens, it would just save you so much emotional capital. And now you're not letting other people dictate you or control you. You control you. You determine how you impact other relationships. You choose. Let me read another verse, Colossians 3:13. You must make allowance for each other's faults and forgive the person who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must. Not maybe, not suggested. Hey, it might be a good idea to forgive someone. No, you must forgive others. Now, whenever people talk about forgiveness or anything like this or offenses, the question invariably comes up, or you may be thinking of this in the back of your head, well, Greg, what if they really wronged me? Like, I really do deserve to feel mad about this. And I can't dispute that. Because there are situations, there are times where people really do offend us, or really do hurt us, or really do things that they shouldn't have done, or they've taken advantage of us, or they've abused us. And I get that. And I'm not trying to belittle that. I'm not trying to make light of those situations. All I'm telling you is that when you forgive someone, you're letting them off the hook. Now, you're letting yourself off the hook. You're letting yourself not be tied to them anymore. And you have to remember, our job is to be a peacemaker. All throughout the New Testament, you see us being called to the ministry of reconciliation, to be called to being peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. Why? Because that's the mandate of following Jesus. He wants us to bring peace, hope, healing, reconciliation to the relationships, not more anger, strife, and dissension. And so the reality is sometimes you just got to pull yourself up and say, I'm going to do this even though it's not easy. And it takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage and a lot of maturity sometimes to overlook an offense, especially when you've really been offended. And I would just say, if somebody really hurt you, by all means, go to that person and try to make it right. Try to have a conversation with them. But remember, that's not me, and you can only control me. You have to have healthy boundaries there. You can't control them or what they did or why they did it, but you can control you and your own perspective. And just remember, you're going to have plenty of conflict and difficult people that you're going to have to deal with. So just remember, is it really worth fighting over? Is this really worth fighting over? I want to close with one more thought from Jesus. This is a very famous verse, love your enemies. Most of us have heard that verse, but I want to read it to you out of the message version as we close. And I think it'll kind of summarize what we've talked about today. Matthew 5. I'm telling you to love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer. For then you are working out of your true selves, your God-created selves. If all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a bonus? Anybody can do that. If you simply say hello to those who greet you, do you expect a medal? Any run-of-the-mill sinner does that. In a word, what I'm saying is, grow up. You're kingdom subjects. Now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Live generously and graciously towards others, the way God lives towards you. You are a child of God. You have a God-given identity. God loves you, God made you, God knows you. And so as you interact in this world, understand that that's who you are. You're not defined by the interactions you have. You're not defined by the people that you come into contact with. You're not defined by other difficult people. You are defined as being a child of God. But if you are a child of God, then live like it. Own that identity and bring hope and love and healing into the world around you instead of more anger and dissension and strife. You will become a master of navigating difficult people. When you have a Christ-like perspective, when you have healthy boundaries, when you check your fuel gauge, you're staying full with the love of Jesus. When you're looking in the mirror, you're holding yourself accountable. You're pulling logs out of your own eye and surrendering them to Jesus. Because Jesus in this verse, what he's saying is, I need representatives out there. I need people to do it differently than everyone else is doing it. I need people to live counterculturally, to bring a different level of love to this world. So my hope is, as a church, that we push ourselves to love those difficult people around us, to do the unexpected, to go there when it's not easy, whether we like it or not. Because Jesus says, I want you to love your enemies and be different. So we're going to sing a couple songs. And while we're singing the songs, obviously worship Jesus, but a name may pop up into your mind of somebody that you, maybe this week, you're going to want to go and have an interaction with them, a conversation with them, a difficult person. And I don't know what the Holy Spirit's going to tell you to do. He may tell you to do something. Here's what I'm going to ask. Just trust the nudge of God. If God prompts you to do something, I want you to trust that nudge. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful that we are difficult and you loved us regardless. Even in our sin, in the midst of our darkest days, our darkest hours, that you were there for us. You loved us so much you were willing to die for us. Let us never take lightly that we didn't deserve it, but you gave us grace anyways. And then let us be ministers of the same type of peace and reconciliation to pass that love on to the world around us, knowing that this world is full of difficult people, but we can shape that by using the love of Christ to pour out of our life. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.